Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, March 9th, 2022. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi removing $16 billion for emergency COVID-19 pandemic response aid from the $1.5 trillion federal government funding bill, the one known as the omnibus. This after some House Democrats objected to offsetting half the money by taking it from unspent aid in previous pandemic relief accounts. The offset, according to the Speaker, was at Republican insistence. The large government funding bill also includes $14 billion for Ukraine as it fights a war with Russia, the bill now moving through the House. Russian airstrike hits a maternity hospital in Mariupol, Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeting, children are under the wreckage, atrocity, and again calling on NATO to enforce a no-fly zone over his country. We'll get the reaction from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby saying the U.S. is rejecting Poland's offer to send Ukraine fighter jets if they are transferred through a U.S. airbase in Germany because of the high risk it could be perceived by Russia as escalating the war. And the U.S. does not believe military jets are the best defense weapons that Ukraine should be using now. And today, with the switch to daylight saving time in much of the U.S. coming up this weekend, a House hearing on whether it should stay in place or possibly have daylight saving time year-round. Now to the U.S. House, meeting today to consider an omnibus spending bill. It funds the government for the rest of this fiscal year through September. Also includes emergency aid for Ukraine and originally COVID-19 preparedness. But CNN writes House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced Wednesday that nearly $16 billion in COVID-19 relief will be stripped out of the massive bill after Democratic leaders faced problems locking down votes amid a last-minute dispute within their party over the issue. More from the Speaker at a news conference.
To follow up on the omnibus, you're blaming Republicans for the delay in the situation with the COVID relief, but you didn't have votes within your own party. Do you regret pushing this text out in the middle of the night and now
No. That's the way it is. Let's grow up about this, okay? We're in a legislative process. We have a deadline for keeping government open. We have a lively negotiation. It has to be bipartisan. We want it to be bipartisan, but in the Senate, you need 60 votes. So when I say blame, you say blame. I'm saying because you need 60 votes, and they consider that a plus. I don't. If you need 60 votes in the Senate, they have to come to terms. And as I said, it was greatly reduced. We didn't do localities. We did much less attributed to the states, and we had, unfortunately, less money. Well, it's a secret that the Republicans have wanted to have. Did you not know that Romney had sent around a letter with all the senators signing it that said we have to take the money out of state and local government? This is not it. What may come as news to someone is that when you subtract money, money is subtracted. So I don't even go there because we are in a negotiation. Great things were accomplished. Rosa DeLauro was masterful. Senator Leahy as well. Even working with the Republican leadership, we came up with a bill. It's $1.5 trillion that will be spent this year. And there has never been a bill. Let me just be very clear. There has never been a bill that when it comes forward, and usually, well, it wasn't the dark of night. It was sometime last night. When it comes forward that somebody, I didn't get what I wanted in the bill. You're telling Noah about the flood. I didn't get what I wanted in the bill. So I say to my members, that's a negotiation, and that's the way it is. And look at what is in the bill and what it does for America's working families, what it does for Ukraine, what it does, that so much needs to be done as opposed to what you don't like about the bill. So we will pass a bill that gets it all done, and we will continue to work on that. But as long as we need 60 votes in the Senate, members are going to have to know there have to be compromises.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, at a news conference this afternoon. She mentioned a deadline. That would be Friday at midnight. The overall $1.5 trillion spending bill would fund the government through the end of the current fiscal year, which is September 30th. and it would end the use for the past 5 months of temporary spending bills, or continuing resolutions as they're known, CRs, that continued program funding for the government of the priorities of the former Congress and the former president. And that latest temporary funding measure runs out midnight Friday. If nothing else is passed, either another temporary bill or a larger bill for the rest of the fiscal year, it could be a government shutdown. On the House floor today, Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, talked about the larger $1.5 trillion funding bill.
This full-year omnibus is the product of extensive bipartisan, bicameral negotiations. Both sides have come together to produce an agreement to fund the government that I think has resulted in a very, very good bill. This means this agreement does not include everything I wanted, and I know it doesn't include everything my Republican friends wanted. But I think at the end of the day, it's a good package that is going to benefit the American people. I especially want to recognize Chairwoman DeLauro and Ranking Member Granger and thank them for forging a bipartisan path forward. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the incredible staff of the Appropriations Committee, as well as the incredible staff of the Rules Committee, Democrats and Republicans, who have worked tirelessly to bring this legislation to the floor today. I think most of my colleagues here do not appreciate how hard the staff works, and I think the American people ought to be proud of those who serve up here in both parties for their public service. The work of Chairwoman DeLauro and Ranking Member Granger could not have come at a more critical time. We are at a moment in history that demands a strong, confident America, and the certainty provided by this omnibus will allow us to tackle some of our country's biggest challenges by helping to support good-paying American jobs, by building ladders of opportunity for hardworking families, by confronting the existential threat of climate change, and by investing in life-saving research into maternal health, mental health, and opiate abuse. I am proud that we negotiated a government funding package that centers the needs of middle-class and working families, not the rich and not on powerful special interests.
Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat, on the House floor. When it comes to the Republican side of the House, there's a split. Some supporting this $1.5 trillion government funding bill, the one known as the omnibus, many opposed. Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma is a member of the Appropriations Committee, and he supports the final product.
It's been a very, very long road to get to this point. But today, the House will act on a bipartisan, bicameral appropriations package. As vice-ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, I'm encouraged that we are finally nearing completion of this fundamental function of Congress to provide full-year funding for the government. We are here today in a time of great crisis. 2 weeks ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched an unprovoked and unjust war against Ukraine, its democratic neighbor to the west. Inflation has skyrocketed to a 40-year high, and due to the administration's reckless action, gas prices have continued to soar month after month after month. Yet despite these crises, the members of this body have worked together and have found common ground on today's legislation. As I've said many times, one of the most consequential duties of a member of Congress is to fund the government and keep it open and operating. At a time of crisis, this is more important than ever.
Republican Congressman Tom Cole today on the House floor. Some other Republican House members opposing the government spending bill. Jody Heiss of Georgia tweeting, "A massive late-night bill drops and Democrats expect us to vote on it without having the time to vet it. The system is broken." Similar message from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, also from Georgia, in a Twitter video.
So you've been hearing probably about the omnibus bill that has been going through the Appropriations Committee. This is a $1.5 trillion omnibus bill that none of us got to see anything in the bill text. We had no idea what was in it until this morning when we found out that the Rules Committee, which is a Democrat-controlled committee, and they put out their basically their alert on their website. They did not email any of us. They put it on their website after midnight. Midnight is as in early this morning. They put it on their website that the Rules Committee would be meeting at 1:30 a.m. 1:30 a.m. And that is where the Rules Committee meets to debate the bill. Now, normally in how Congress should work, but it doesn't work this way since Pelosi has been Speaker, is an appropriations bill is something that every member of Congress can go. We can put amendments in, we can debate on the bill. And then once it goes to Rules Committee, that is where we can go and argue back and try to put amendments and try to make changes. So they met in the middle of the night, in the dark of night. The Democrat-run Rules Committee met at 1:30 in the morning, and by 2:30 a.m., early this morning, they had passed the $1.5 trillion omnibus bill, and they released the bill text. So for all of us here in Washington, when we woke up earlier this morning, we found out that it was too late to go in and try to put amendments in, try to argue back, try to get things removed from this horrendous, absolutely horrendous $1.5 trillion spending bill that's supposed to keep the government, the lights on. But no, we weren't able to do that because the Democrats snuck it through, literally snuck it through from 1:30 in the morning till 2:30 in the morning.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene posting that video. Connor O'Brien is a defense reporter for Politico and has been studying the few thousand pages of the omnibus spending bill. He joins us now. This disagreement over the COVID-19 emergency aid, disagreement from House Democrats. What can you tell about how this played out this afternoon?
This was. I suppose we couldn't expect a 2,700-page bill of about $1.5 trillion to get to go through in a day without any turbulence. But basically, the Biden administration had made this request actually a lot higher than the $15 billion in COVID pandemic aid that was in the bill. I think originally wanted around $30 billion, but this bill included about $15 billion for things like therapeutics, vaccination efforts, international efforts to vaccinate people. It was a big sticking point with many Democrats that that aid was essentially offset from previous rounds of aid to states that had not been spent, and so you saw a number of Democrats who were not on board with this idea from states that could be affected. You saw members from Michigan, Washington State, Minnesota. There were some big huddles on the House floor earlier today during the last vote, which took a while, and you could tell that there were some issues there. So the plan now for Democrats is to take that money out and bring the remaining spending bill back, try to pass it today.
$1.5 trillion, as you mentioned, it's a long time coming, a lot of negotiations. How did that get divided up between defense and non-defense?
Yeah, well, that was months of wrangling, really, and the big push and pull for many months between Democrats and Republicans had been this balance of domestic spending to defense spending. Republicans obviously had designs on a budget much larger for the Pentagon than what President Joe Biden wanted, and Democrats essentially gave them that plus a little bit more in exchange for some very large increases in domestic spending. Where it came out to basically was overall defense spending came out to $782 billion, which is about a 6% increase from the current level, and domestic spending came out to $730 billion, about a 7% increase. So, while neither side may be comfortable with some of those higher numbers, progressives particularly had hoped that unified government would cause a slower pace of growth in the military budget. Each side kind of got what they wanted. Democrats like the the domestic increase. Republicans and a number of Democrats actually like the higher Pentagon top line, and so I think you may see that reflected in a bipartisan vote, depending on how this shapes up over the next few hours.
We're talking with Conor O'Brien from Politico. In a bill this big, a number of other unrelated pieces of legislation got put in. You tweeted they hitched a ride.
Yeah, well, this is obviously, a catch-all bill. In a measure like this, there's going to be a lot of stuff that people don't like, but they're going to vote for the larger package because it contains many of their funding priorities. And you'll see stuff that may not have been able to pass on its own, or just lawmakers didn't have the time to, get it all done in standalone fashion, and they're hitching a ride. There is an extension, I believe, of the Violence Against Women Act. There is cybersecurity information sharing legislation that's tacked on there. The one that we're following is the Intelligence Authorization Bill, which has a lot of trouble each year getting done as its own bill, and you'll often see it attached to the omnibus. So a lot of that stuff, plus obviously emergency aid for Ukraine.
The deadline is Friday. Also, is the White House on board with this bill?
By all accounts, it looks like they're going to sign this. I think they are. The sense I get on the Hill, particularly, is that folks are ready to kind of close up this fiscal year 2022, which we're already 5 months into, and we're probably only a few weeks away from President Biden unveiling his 2023 budget. So I think there's a lot of momentum to just, finish off the fiscal year that we're in and, move on to the next battle.
Conor O'Brien, defense reporter for Politico. Find his stories at Politico.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And two more notes about the spending bills. First, that Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, chair of the Appropriations Committee, Democrat from Connecticut, has now introduced a standalone $16 billion emergency COVID aid bill. She says it does not include any offsets from state and local fiscal relief funds, and that bill will be voted on separately by the House. Also, the House is readying a 4-day temporary government funding extension, the CR, the continuing resolution, just in case the bill that funds the government can't get through the House and the Senate, signed by the president by the deadline, Friday at midnight. And now to the war in Ukraine. From the Associated Press, Ukrainian officials say a Russian strike has hit a children's hospital and maternity facility in the besieged southeastern port city of Mariupol. A statement on the city council's social media account saying the hospital suffered colossal damage. They say at least 17 people were wounded in the attack. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeting, "There were people, children under the wreckage." He called the strike an atrocity. And he also tweeted, "How much longer will the world be an accomplice ignoring terror? Close the sky right now. Stop the killings. You have the power, but you seem to be losing humanity." There are questions about this today to the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. They held a joint news conference at the State Department in Washington.
We have Sarah Smith at the BBC, please.
Thank you very much. After the direct strike on a children's hospital in Mariupol, President Zelensky is asking you both and NATO to stop the killings, close the skies, he says, and that if you don't, you're an accomplice to terror. How do you explain to him that there is no possibility of a no-fly zone in these circumstances?
Well, as I've said, Sarah, the best way to help protect the skies is through anti-air weaponry, which the UK is now going to be supplying to Ukraine. That's what the Defence Secretary announced earlier today. And of course, the attack on the hospital is absolutely abhorrent, reckless and appalling. And the UK is at the forefront of supplying humanitarian aid into Ukraine. We've already pledged 220 million of humanitarian aid. Our DEC appeal has now reached 130 million. which is the largest amount it's ever achieved since 2004. So the British people are full square behind the people of Ukraine, and we're doing all we can to support.
And I would just add, as we already said, first, we both, our governments both, our peoples both have tremendous admiration for President Zelensky, for his entire team, for the Ukrainian people that they represent. But the courage they've shown, the strength, the determination, the dignity faced with this Russian onslaught is extraordinary. And it's powerfully moving, I think, to people around the world. If I were in President Zelensky's position, I'm sure I would be asking for everything possible in his mind to help the Ukrainian people. And as the Foreign Secretary and I have laid out, both of our countries and so many others have done extraordinary things to make sure that the Ukrainians have in their hands the means to effectively defend themselves against this war of choice from Russia, as well as to do everything we can with very significant resources to care for Ukrainian people to the best of our ability inside Ukraine, those who've been forced to flee outside of Ukraine to meet their humanitarian needs. And the goal is the same. It's to end this aggression, it's to save lives, and to prevent more senseless bloodshed. As part of that, we also have to see to it that this war does not expand. Our goal is to end the war, not to expand it, including potentially expand it to NATO territory. We want to make sure that it's not prolonged to the best of our ability. Otherwise, it's going to turn even deadlier, involve more people, and I think potentially even make things harder to resolve in Ukraine itself. So, as the Foreign Secretary said, we have exactly the same perspective on that. Introducing, in our case, American service members in Ukraine, on Ukrainian territory or soil, or American pilots into Ukrainian airspace, whether on a full or on a limited basis, would almost certainly lead to direct conflict between the United States, between NATO, and Russia. And that would expand the conflict. It would prolong it. It would make it much more deadlier than it already is. And that would be neither in the interest of our countries nor in the interest of Ukraine. I can't speak for NATO, obviously, but we've heard the same message from its Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken with the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, a joint news conference at the State Department in Washington. Story from ABC News. An awkward dispute between the United States and NATO ally Poland is casting doubt on Ukraine's hopes to obtain the MiG fighter jets it says it needs to defend against Russia's invasion. The article goes on, no one wants to stand out alone behind the action, which could invite Russian retaliation. U.S. government threw Poland a hot potato with a request to send Soviet-made fighter jets, which Ukrainian pilots are trained to fly, to Ukraine. Poland threw it right back, saying it was prepared to hand over all 28 of its MiG-29 planes, but to NATO by flying them to the U.S. base in Ramstein, Germany. That plan took the U.S. off guard. By late Tuesday, the Pentagon rejected it as untenable. That was from ABC. Today at the Pentagon, the press secretary John Kirby with more. He says that the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to his Polish counterpart.
Now, the secretary also had a chance to discuss with Minister Blaszczak the proposal to send MiG-29 fighter aircraft to Ukraine, and specifically the notion of doing so by way of transfer to U.S. custody. Secretary Austin thanked the minister for Poland's willingness to continue to look for ways to assist Ukraine. But he stressed that we do not support the transfer of additional fighter aircraft to the Ukrainian Air Force at this time, and therefore have no desire to see them in our custody either. Let me walk you through the reasons for this. First, we believe the best way to support Ukrainian defense is by providing them the weapons and the systems that they need most to defeat Russian aggression, in particular, anti-armor and air defense. We, along with other nations, continue to send them these weapons, and we know that they are being used with great effect. The slowed Russian advance in the north and the contested airspace over Ukraine is evidence alone of that. Although Russian air capabilities are significant, their effectiveness has been limited due to Ukrainian strategic, operational, and tactical ground-based air defense systems, surface-to-air missiles, and manpads. Secondly, the Ukrainian Air Force currently has several squadrons of fully mission-capable aircraft. We assess that adding aircraft to the Ukrainian inventory is not likely to significantly change the effectiveness of the Ukrainian Air Force relative to Russian capabilities. Therefore, we believe that the gain from transferring those MiG-29s is low. And finally, the intelligence community has assessed that the transfer of MiG-29s to Ukraine may be mistaken as escalatory and could result in a significant Russian reaction that might increase the prospects of a military escalation with NATO. Therefore, we also assess the transfer of the MiG-29s to Ukraine to be high risk. And we are grateful for the superb support and cooperation of our Polish allies who continue to host thousands of our troops and who are welcoming more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees. Polish generosity is clearly on display for the whole world to see. But at this time, we believe the provision of additional fighter aircraft provides little increased capabilities at high risk. We also believe that there are alternative options that are much better suited to support the Ukrainian military in their fight against Russia, and we will continue to pursue those options.
Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, his statement with reporters in the Pentagon briefing room. Up on Capitol Hill, the House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy saying he doesn't understand why the U.S. could not take Poland up on its offer and send those fighter jets to Ukraine through the U.S. Air Base in Germany.
What did you make of the Pentagon saying that the move to get those planes into Ukraine via Germany was untenable?
I think they're wrong. I think the longer they take, more people will die. I don't understand if you can supply them with a Javelin and Poland wants to give them MiGs and they want to defend themselves, why wouldn't you allow somebody to defend themselves? Especially when they believe in freedom. Especially this was unprovoked. Putin is evil, and what he's doing to these people is devastating. It's not just America glued to the set. The world is watching this. They're asking to defend themselves. They've never once asked for American men and women in uniform to come and fight. All they want is not to fight with sticks. Allow them that opportunity. And the longer you wait, it just goes back to the very point. If you had the intel that they were going to invade, would you really think the best question is, I'll put sanctions on you after you invade? And then when you put the sanctions on, you listen to President Biden said, this won't work for months though. What if you had provided them weapons they could buy, deter Russia from ever invading? How many lives would have been saved? We would be in a different situation today. And we should take that exact same lesson and not slow down any weapon sales to Taiwan either.
The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, at his weekly news conference on Capitol Hill. McCarthy also, as the Washington Post reports it, declined to echo Donald Trump's praise of Russian President Vladimir Putin in a rare break by the top House Republican with the former president. The article describes that 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump told a radio program, I went in yesterday and there was a television screen and I said, this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of Ukraine. Putin declares it as independent. Here's a guy that says, I'm going to declare a big portion of Ukraine independent. He uses the word independent, and we're going to go out and we're going to go in and we're going to help keep peace. You got to say that's pretty savvy. Some of the quotes from former President Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago. Here's the question today to Congressman McCarthy.
Ukraine. The former president has praised Vladimir Putin's moves as very savvy and as genius. Do you agree with them?
I do not think anything savvy or genius about Putin. I think Putin is evil. I think he's a dictator. And I think he's murdering people right now. And I think what has happened, I went to Ukraine taking Republicans and Democrats a number of years ago. When I came back from that trip, I requested a meeting with then the Vice President of America, Joe Biden. I went to the Situation Room. And I advocated that we should sell them javelins based upon Russia had come into Ukraine before. They have no defense to be able to fight back. The uniqueness of Ukraine is they don't ask for American men or women to come fight for them. All they ask is to be able to supply the weapons that they could defend themselves, defend their own freedom. That administration said no. President Trump said yes. It gave him some ability. But I think the slowness of what has happened this year, and I've raised this to President Biden earlier in the year when he first communicated with Putin. I did not think sanctions would affect Putin. He's lived under sanctions for decades. I believe that you should have taken action to allow Ukraine to buy weapons early. That could deter Putin from entering and invading. President Biden had intel that said he would invade. But at the whole time he said President Biden would do nothing till after the invasion. He gave that same information to China that shared it with Russia. There's so many mistakes of why this is happening. From the way that President Biden exited Afghanistan, losing 13 members of our military, showing Putin a weakness. And this is a question that I continue to ponder. He provided them Nord Stream 2 pipeline. After they invaded Ukraine, they pulled the sanctions on it, made it that you could not have it, to weaken the economy of Russia. If that weakens the economy of Russia, closing the XL pipeline, wouldn't that weaken the economy of America too then? Just wondering.
House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. You can find his full briefing and all the events you hear on C-SPAN Radio on our website at cspan.org. Former President Donald Trump, since he made the comments a couple of weeks ago calling Russian President Vladimir Putin genius and savvy, has also now said that Russia's invasion into Ukraine is a holocaust, urging Russia to stop fighting, telling Fox Business Russia has to stop killing these people, and suggesting a deal could be reached to end the conflict. Washington Today continues in a minute.
I'm pleased to nominate Judge Jackson, who will bring extraordinary qualifications, deep experience and intellect, and a rigorous judicial record to the court.
I am truly humbled by the extraordinary honor of this nomination, and I am especially grateful for the care that you have taken in discharging your constitutional duty in service of our democracy with all that is going on in the world today.
President Biden nominates Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit to succeed retiring Justice Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court. If confirmed, Judge Jackson would become the first African-American woman to serve on the nation's highest court. Follow this historic process. Watch the confirmation hearing starting Monday, March 21st, live on C-SPAN, cspan.org, or by downloading the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. In the Wall Street Journal this morning, President Biden is enlisting top executives and governors of 2 auto industry states to push Congress to resolve differences and pass legislation aimed at boosting U.S. competitiveness with China. The legislation includes $52 billion to boost domestic silicon chip manufacturing, a provision supporters say is needed to ensure a steady supply of computer chips for electronics, autos, and other industries in the United States. Executives from computer maker HP, also engine manufacturer Cummins, appliance producer Whirlpool, and others meeting with the president virtually today. He was in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, and those 2 governors, Eric Holcomb, Republican from Indiana, and Gretchen Whitmer, Democrat from Michigan. Here's the president.
So today I'm urging the House and the Senate to work out the differences between the 2 versions of this bill and get it to my desk as quickly as you can. Passing this bill will do 4 important things. First, it will send a message to the world that America is back in the game, open for investment, commitment, creating clean energy economy, and competing to win in the 21st century. Second, we're going to create jobs, good-paying, cutting-edge jobs, manufacturing jobs, many that don't require a 4-year college degree. Third, making it in America is one of the ways we can address our cost and supply chain challenges. When we build products we need, we don't have to wait, and we reduce shipping costs, and we can get goods moving faster. And fourthly, it will mean that we aren't overly reliant on other countries from risk like wars and pandemics. And I saw during the pandemic that when we needed it the most, we were a short supply of masks, gowns, gloves, ventilators, and other essential equipment. We should never be in that position again. And the bottom line is this bipartisan innovation bill will allow us to stamp more products made in America. And it's going to bolster our national security and our economic security. It matters. So let's get it done.
President Biden in the Eisenhower Executive Office building addressing a number of leaders of major companies and also, as mentioned, 2 governors. Here is Eric Holcomb. He's the governor of Indiana, Republican.
This innovation bill, ultimate bill that comes together, is a key part of our futures. It's a key part of a Midwestern microelectronics corridor, if you will, that has everything to do with economic development and national security for a state like Indiana. And you could probably say this about a lot of Midwestern states, but we're heavy intensive in manufacturing. #1 per capita for a state like Indiana, 5 auto OEMs, medical devices, the list just goes on and on and on. And I would just say that it's 2 things. One, it's been said that speed kills, and in this sense, slow speed kills. We need to get this done. We need to get it on your desk. We need to get it signed so that we can not just catch up with the competition, but lead. We know a little something about this in Indiana. We got the Indy 500, and we like to go fast.
Well, the kids are going fast. The gallon of gas is down 14% today, so I want to make sure they go fast.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, so, you know, it's speed. We got to get there, and we got to get there yesterday, and then also partnerships. And for us and in the Midwest, we have those talent pipelines, Madam Secretary, that we've spent a lot of time talking about. Purdue University, one of the largest engineering schools in the country, top ranked. Rose-Hulman, #1 undergraduate engineering school. So we've got a community college system that is built, the structure in place, as well as Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane with the DoD and all the research that goes into it. So the federal, the private sector, and the state governments that come together, those partnerships are in place right now so that we can get it to your desk and get on with business.
Governor Eric Holcomb, Republican from Indiana, part of today's conversation hosted by the president. A number of CEOs of large businesses also there. And the House and Senate have passed different versions of this competitiveness bill and still must resolve those differences in a conference process. Wall Street today, a rebound from the drops the past week. The Dow up 653, NASDAQ up 460, S&P up 107. President Biden signing an executive order, writes CBS News, to explore establishing a U.S. central bank digital currency, also known as a U.S. digital dollar, akin to a cryptocurrency. New executive order also directs the Treasury Department to develop policy recommendations taking into account what kind of impact the digital dollar would have on the U.S. economy. Other agencies tasked with considering privacy, security, and potential negative climate impacts, given the enormous amount of electric power required to validate many types of cryptocurrency transactions. President Biden, a moment ago, joking about the price of gasoline and not being able to go fast. He said the price of the barrel of oil down $14. That's true, but the average price of a gallon of gasoline in the United States is now $4.25, according to AAA. That's up 8 cents in one day. And high gas prices, not only an issue in the United States, it's also in Great Britain. Guardian newspaper reporting that opposition leader Keir Starmer accusing Prime Minister Boris Johnson of presiding over a failed energy policy, resulting in rocketing bills. Here's part of Prime Minister's Question Time in the British House of Commons.
The typical energy bill is going up by £700 next month, and that's because of pressures before Russia invaded Ukraine. The Chancellor's solution? A forced £200 loan for every household, paid back in mandatory instalments over 5 years. The big gamble behind that policy was that energy costs would drop quickly after a short spike. That bet now looks certain to fail. When will the Prime Minister force the Chancellor into a U-turn?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the Chancellor has set out plans to help families with energy costs, with unprecedented measures to abate council tax by £150, Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the other schemes that we are putting forward. And I can tell the House that, yes, he's absolutely right. That we need to meet the long-term impacts of the spike in energy prices, and that's why I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term and with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Prime Minister understands the mess he's in. Working families are facing a £700 spike in April. They won't even receive their £200 loan from the Chancellor until October. The wholesale price of oil and gas is now ballooning. So, by October, when the loan finally comes in, household bills are set to shoot up by another £1,000. It's a total mess. So I ask again, when is the Prime Minister going to force the Chancellor to U-turn?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if he's asking for the Chancellor to U-turn on the support that we're giving to families and households, I think that he's absolutely out of his mind. We are going to continue to give people support throughout this difficult period, as we did throughout the coronavirus epidemic, Mr. Speaker, with unprecedented levels of support. We have a £200 discount on bills, £150 a non-repayable reduction in council tax, and £144 million extra to help councils support vulnerable families with their energy bills. Altogether, Mr. Speaker, there is a £20 billion package of financial help that we are giving the British people, and we will continue to do more. I think a U-turn, Mr. Speaker, is the last thing we want.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he leads the Conservative Party, getting questions from Keir Starmer, the opposition Labour Party leader. Prime Minister's questions in the British House of Commons in London today. Back to the U.S., this from NBC in Miami, WTVJ-TV. A large group of South Florida high school students held a walkout Wednesday morning to protest a bill that would limit instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade in the state. The students from Cypress Bay High School in Weston walked out of the school shortly after 9 a.m., gathering on a field. The bill, which activists have named the Don't Say Gay bill, was passed by Florida's legislature on Tuesday and now moves to the desk of Governor Ron DeSantis, who has indicated he'll sign it. This issue was raised today in Washington at the White House briefing with Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
About the Florida bill that just passed, restricting the speaking about of homosexuality and gender identity up to third grade. And then I have a question about surveillance matters that have been in the news. Regarding the Florida bill, in 1994, when many of us in this room were in school, President Biden actually voted for a much broader restriction that banned federal funds from being used for, quote, the promotion of homosexuality as a positive lifestyle alternative. Why did he do that, and can you describe how his thinking has evolved over the years?
Well, I think that you have seen the president speak passionately about his view that a bill like this, a bill that would discriminate against families, against kids, put these kids in a position of not getting the support they need at a time where that's exactly what they need, is discriminatory. It's a form of bullying. It is horrific. I mean, the president has spoken to that. In terms of his views and comments from 25 years ago, I think the most important question now is, why are Florida leaders deciding they need to discriminate against kids who are members of the LGBTQI community? What prompts them to do that? Is it meanness? Is it wanting to make kids have more difficult times in school, in their communities? I would pose that question to them, and we can talk about it more tomorrow if you get an answer.
Was there a reason you supported the same policy, though, in the 90s when we were all in school?
I think what's important to note here is how outspoken the president has been against discrimination, against kids, against members of the LGBTQI plus community, and what we're looking at here is a bill that would propagate misinformed, hateful policies and impact children. So that's the question. I hope maybe you can pose that to some of the leaders in Florida. Maybe they'll return your phone calls, and I'll look forward to having that conversation with you.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters today in the White House briefing room. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis defended this bill on Tuesday as it was passing. He was questioned as well by a reporter.
Does it say that in the bill? Does it say that in the bill? I'm asking you to tell me what's in the bill, because you are pushing false narratives. It doesn't matter what critics say.
Well, it says it bans classroom instruction on sexual identity and gender orientation.
For who? For grades pre-K through 3. So 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And the idea that you wouldn't be honest about that and tell people what it actually says, it's why people don't trust people like you, because you peddle false narratives. And so we disabuse you of those narratives. And we're going to make sure that parents are able to send their kid to kindergarten without having some of this stuff injected into their school curriculum.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, on Tuesday as that bill was passing, and he says he will sign it into law. Monique Steele performing today at the annual Women's History Month event in the U.S. Capitol building, hosted by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This year's program also honoring former tennis professional Billie Jean King, also an activist, and women athletes celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the 1972 law prohibiting sex-based discrimination in any school or education program that receives federal funding. Billie Jean King speaking today about why that law is important and what reforms, she says, still need to be enacted.
You can never understand inclusion until you've been excluded. You can never understand inclusion until you've been excluded. Today, because of Title IX, things for women are different. We are seeing an increased number of women getting college degrees. We are also celebrating 50 years of women being allowed to receive sports scholarships. Sports are so visible, many think Title IX is just about sports, when in fact it is about gender equity in education. The reason women get sports scholarships today is because the law states no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. The key word is activity. Senator Birchby once told me there was debate over including the word activity. And he was so happy they left it in. Without the word activity, women would not have received sports scholarships. Looking ahead to the next 50 years of Title IX, we must increase compliance with the law and find a workable solution for name, image, and likeness laws. And most importantly, we need to give attention to those who have thus far been left behind, defining inclusive opportunities for transgender athletes, athletes with disabilities, and girls and women of color. Yeah, that's good.
Billie Jean King, former pro tennis player and an activist at today's Women's History Month program in the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. As mentioned, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was there. Also, Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia, Democrat. He chairs the Education and Labor Committee. And Dr. Gwendolyn Wendy Mink, daughter of the late Congresswoman Patsy Mink, Democrat from Hawaii, also there. Patsy Mink was the author and sponsor of Title IX back in 1972. Daylight saving time in the U.S. starts this weekend. Most of the country moving clocks ahead 1 hour, designed to shift that hour of daylight from morning to evening. And that will last until standard time resumes on November 6th, when the clocks will move back an hour. But is all of this moving a good idea? The U.S. House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee holding a hearing on that today, arguing for year-round daylight saving time. Steve Calandrillo, University of Washington law professor.
I am here today to urge Congress to permanently extend daylight saving time, to make it all year round for 5 important reasons. Number one, the most important reason, permanent daylight saving time would save lives. Darkness kills and sunshine saves. Number two, we're going to talk about the crime reduction that various representatives have already referenced. Daylight saving time prevents crime by as much as 20%. Number three, we're going to talk about the energy savings created by daylight saving time. This was the original justification for daylight saving time. It's no longer as strong as it used to be, but it still does save energy. Number four, I want to discuss avoiding switching the clocks twice a year. As many representatives have alluded to, people don't like changing their clocks twice a year, and it's more than just dislike. It messes up circadian rhythms, disrupts your sleep cycles, and has all kinds of health and economic effects. But permanent daylight saving time can stop that. And lastly, the fifth reason for going to permanent daylight saving time is that business and recreational interests will flourish in the evening sunshine.
Steve Calandrillo, University of Washington law professor, a witness at today's House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee hearing looking at daylight saving time. Also testifying and wanting to keep things as they are, Lyle Beckwith, Senior Vice President at the National Association of Convenience Stores.
There are many benefits to having more time when it's light in the afternoon or early evening, and we've heard these as well. They include increasing economic activity as well as reduced motor vehicle accidents. But the benefits have always been weighed against the concerns that we should not have kids going to school in the dark in the morning. So this is balancing between the various interests that led us to the long-standing policy of switching our clocks in the spring and fall to take the most advantage of the daylight that we can every year. As I said next, testified in favor of extending daylight savings time before an Energy and Commerce Subcommittee as early as 1983 and has supported extensions of the policy. While there are questions about how much, if any, energy is saved with daylight saving, the majority of studies show that reduced use of electricity for lighting does decrease overall energy demand. That's been one of the overriding points of public discussion regarding the use of daylight saving time, but there are other reasons that moving from standard time to daylight savings time in the spring is good policy. Our industry has consistently found that commerce increases when the nation moves to daylight saving time. When the clocks change in the spring, people feel as though they have more time after work to engage in the range of activities that increase commerce, from eating out to shopping to participating in or taking kids to a variety of outdoor activities. They consistently show increased spending when daylight hours are shifted later in the day throughout daylight saving. One study compared spending changes when daylight saving started and stopped in Los Angeles with spending in Phoenix, which does not observe daylight saving time. The result was clear increases in spending in Los Angeles when daylight saving started and losses of spending when it ended. For the convenience industry specifically, 76.5% of sales come during the part of the year when we're on daylight savings time, yet a significantly higher percentage than the 65% of the year we spend using daylight saving time. Overall, this means about $5 billion in incremental sales for the industry attributable to the change. Those are big numbers.
Lyle Beckwith is a senior vice president with the National Association of Convenience Stores, testifying before today's House Subcommittee hearing on the future of daylight saving time. USA Today, with an explainer article, says that daylight saving time became a national standard in the U.S. in 1966 with the passage of the Uniform Time Act. States either have to change the clocks at a specified time or stick with standard time throughout the year. And they have to get approval from Congress before doing that. Daylight saving time now accounts for about 65% of the year. It was expanded in 2007. Thanks for listening today. Get more Washington stories sent to you each day with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Hope you have a good night.